Hi, everyone. My name is Maura, and I lead the data science team at Patreon, and I'm thrilled to be speaking to everyone today. In keeping with today's theme of no limits, I'm going to be chatting about the incredible growth that Patreon has seen over the last 8 months, how our assumptions and expectations constantly shifted to adapt to reality, and how we use data to understand what was changing in the business and how teams needed to respond. And across all of this, I want to talk about what it looks like to use data strategically to be proactive rather than just reactive and in service of an organization. So, first, the 30 seconds on Patreon and the market we're operating in. Our mission at Patreon is to fund the creative class. And we're doing that by offering a product that makes it really easy for creators to get paid by their fans through recurring membership. What's really cool about the market we're operating in is that it's large and growing. There was this great survey done of teenagers in the UK, and 34% of them wanted to be a YouTuber when they grew up, and 18% wanted to be a blogger, and 16% wanted to be musicians. So those are the creators that we're trying to serve in the future. And of course, the millions of creators around the world today who want to use membership to get paid, in addition to existing revenue streams like ads and brand deals. And of course, with COVID-19, the lives of creators have shifted dramatically with in-person events getting canceled. So it's been a really interesting and exciting time for Patreon. But before we talk about what's happened in the last 8 months, I just want to tell you a bit about what data science looks like at the business. So I think about data science as a horizontal layer that enables all teams across the business to make better decisions. So I'm thinking about how is the product and engineering team using data? How is our creator partnerships team, which is our sales team, using data? How are we helping finance and legal make better forecasts? And of course, in reality, this looks a little bit more like this. We spend most of our time as data scientists, and I spend most of my time thinking about how can we build a better product, and how can we have great marketing and a compelling brand, and a lot of time on finance, and then, of course, everything else as well. And I think for me, the keys to really strong data leadership and strong partnership with these functions is, first of all, context. If you have a data scientist who's going from doing marketing analytics one day to machine learning the next day to A/B testing the next day, they're not going to have the business context and depth to make great decisions and great analysis in that specific function. So we try to make sure our data scientists are, sitting with the teams, are embedded in their decisions and in what they're trying to build. The second is data relevance. And I know it's kind of a funny thing to say at a data conference that I don't think data should be the primary factor in every decision, but I do believe it's true. Sometimes your decisions are going to be more strategic. Sometimes they're going to be really led by user research or design. So making sure that when I'm thinking about where to use data across the business, I'm using it in the places where it's most useful and most relevant. And finally, storytelling. Every function and every leader is trying to understand how is their team performing, how are their products working, and so understanding what that story is that they're trying to tell, and how data can help them tell it in a rigorous, honest, and a better way. Now, this wasn't always the case that data science was kind of leading at the front at Patreon. There's definitely been times, and there are still sometimes today, when we're more a service organization. And I want to talk through an example where I think this didn't work well. A few years ago, Patreon launched a live streaming option for creators. So creators can post content for their patrons, and we enabled the ability for them to live stream on Patreon, either through a third-party integration or through a YouTube link. And you can see this live stream option here. And data science was not really involved in the decision around how to build this product and how big we thought it was going to be. We did some very basic analysis that looked at like how many creators mentioned live streaming in their posts, but we didn't have that context of sitting with the product team and really understanding what we were trying to do with live streaming. And as a result, data science was brought in after the fact to understand, like, hey, how did live streaming perform? And we thought that 40% of our creators were going to use it on a monthly basis, and only about 1% of creators were using it, even with great marketing and awareness of the new product. And to me, this failure to have data science integrated from the beginning led me to really rethink, how do we use data in our product process, in our go-to-market process, and can we kind of be there at the forefront and be involved in those decisions rather than just being brought in to create a graph or do an analysis. So I try to bring this lesson into what's happened with Patreon in 2020, and I'll set the scene for what we've seen in the business. So on March 6th, we had a PM say, hey, there could potentially be a positive impact on patronage as more people stay at home and are looking for entertainment. And this is where we really started to think, okay, maybe something's going to happen with our market related to what's happening with COVID-19. And the lucky thing, or the thing that I'm proud of, is that we've spent the last few years building up really rigorous systems around metrics and dashboards and alerting and processes like weekly business reviews that help us review key trends. So it was fairly easy for us to say, okay, what is going on in the business? One of the first things we looked at was patron churn. Are more patrons leaving because of financial instability on Patreon? And you can see at that March 6th point, things looked pretty good. We see some seasonality at the beginning of the month, but year over year, things looked fine. And we also started to look at creators launching. And specifically, we did a very kind of segmented, narrow analysis of creators launching and actually mentioning COVID when they talk about why they're launching on Patreon. And as you can see at March 6th, there wasn't much going on, but we were about to experience this huge influx of growth. So this was the time when, as a product team and across the business, we really tried to pause and ask, what do we think could change with behavior? And what's really important about hypothesis generation is not to kind of toss it over the wall to data science and say, hey, data science, can you look into this hypothesis I have? But instead for data science to come to the table and say, I'm seeing this anomaly or I'm seeing this trend, and here's what I think we might want to do about it. So Patreon, we were asking, maybe more creators are promoting their page and driving more traffic to the site. Maybe patron retention and churn are going to change based on the economic instability. Maybe there are going to be creators who have shorter tenure because they only need Patreon to kind of bridge them through the pandemic. And maybe we also expected more word of mouth virality as well. And what we started to see in the business was pretty amazing. We started to see fitness creators launching on Patreon, which we hadn't really seen before. This is a Portuguese fitness creator. We started to see creators launching who were responding to Black Lives Matter and to racial injustice and who were supporting those communities. And we started to see lots of like physical places launch on Patreon, coffee shops and record stores. And what was really cool is this drove some product decisions. We got together and said, what can we do in the product that's going to help these creators? Maybe we can provide more resources. Maybe we can start to think about reactivating patrons. If they churn because of COVID and they mention that, maybe we email them in a few months and say, hey, is now a better time to support? But most importantly, beyond these product decisions for us, was what were we going to tell our creators? Creators were nervous at this time. And at Patreon, one of our core values is putting creators first. So we knew that we had to get all of these trends and all of this data into a story for creators and into some facts that they could hang on to during this time. So that's what we did. We first looked at growth in new patrons, new subscriptions. And as you can see month over month at the latter half of March on the right-hand side here, we started seeing 40% month over month growth, 50% month over month growth in our key markets, which was exciting. We could tell creators, hey, fans are flocking to Patreon like never before to support you during this time. And then we looked at creators launching, and not only creators launching, but creators launching and having and earning their first patron. And we saw a huge spike in this towards the end of March, showing again that there was a large influx of growth driven by COVID. And finally, and probably most importantly for our creators, we looked at churn. Creators were anxious that their fans would be leaving because of what was going on with the pandemic. And while we saw slightly elevated churn, site-wide, things were really stable. So we were able to take this data and turn it into a story. And what's important is this was not only a story for our creators. We had a big live stream. We chatted with thousands of our creators about what was happening on the site, but we use this across the business. So thinking about what it looks like for data science or a data leader to think strategically about what's going on in the business and how is that driving decisions. So on the product side, as I mentioned, we thought, how might we build better product? On the engineering side, we were asking, are our systems resilient and scalable to this huge influx of growth? On creator partnerships, which is our version of sales, we were using these graphs in conversation and saying, hey, creators, you can feel confident that Patreon is awesome right now, and we're going to be here for you. On creator success, our account management team, we were partnering with existing creators and comparing their dynamics of their business and their patronage to these site-wide trends. And of course, on finance, asking, what can we expect to happen next? How should we forecast or not forecast this? One success story from this experience of Patreon and COVID-19 is we launched a local businesses product. And this makes it easy for local businesses to understand how they can succeed on Patreon. And to date, these local businesses have earned hundreds of thousands of dollars of recurring membership revenue. And what's great is not only did we launch a new product, but we tied it back to the data. We made sure that these creators are tagged and identified as local businesses. So if in a few years, Patreon wants to understand, how do local businesses grow versus podcasters versus YouTubers versus writers, we have that data to be able to then help the business make even better decisions. So I hope a few takeaways from this story, like ensure you have a process for understanding changes in metrics and framing them as product opportunities. Think about the systems you might need for studying behavior over time. One thing that was really interesting at Patreon during this time is that our growth in different regions of the world was stronger or weaker based on fiscal responses. So, for example, in Germany, right after coronavirus hit, it was easy for creators to get a loan from the government, to get a grant, whereas in the US, there wasn't as strong a response for creators. So, you need to be able to understand your growth via region is a very key segment. So thinking about like, what are those segmentations for your business? And then of course, like when an external event causes positive growth, trying to lean into that change and see if there's something that can be productized. We've learned a ton over the past 8 months about the fact that when creators have a compelling reason to promote Patreon, it drives a ton of traffic. So are there other things we can give them to create that compelling reason that we can build into the product? I hope this story has illustrated a few of these points that are important to me about having the context of how the business works and certain areas of the business work to make great decisions with data. To have the data relevance, we didn't go and build an ML model that was going to predict how the business would grow based on coronavirus. We used pretty basic analytics. And then, of course, storytelling, understanding what is this data showing us about what's happening in the business, and how do we make that concise and make that clear so that all the leaders across Patreon are making better decisions to make a better product for creators and ultimately to build a better business to fund the creative class. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of Amplify.